Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you are watching a live diary with Alexey Arestovich. Hello Alexey. Good evening. Alright, let's start with Syria today, where Tehran attacked, probably taking away Syria from Bashar, and maybe I'm wrong, but perhaps can you elaborate on, do you think if that activity in Syria can weaken the position of Putin on the global table of negotiations and solve a lot of questions of Arabian Spring from early back in the day that were postponed? Well, your tasks, Nikolai, are pretty lofty. Okay, so let's do it this way. We probably cannot fully go into the future predictions for these outcomes, but we can already say that this is one of the tension cracks around which the new world order will be built, meaning the old world order, the Potsdam-Yalta system that was complete in 1945 and stopped working at the end of the 80s when the security in Europe started to be violated in the Yugoslavia conflict. This is an important crack that goes through Syria because it's a tectonic crack. It touches the interests both locally, of local players, and global players. For Putin, it does contain rather significant symbolic and contextual meaning. First of all, Syria is a base for expansion further to the east, to Africa, military economic integration with African countries, and also this is the area that allowed to produce pressure on some key players: Turkey, Kurds, United States, Arabs, and Israel. And everybody had to consider Russian influence in that area. Plus, Russian-Iranian cooperation was actually built via Syria. They had certain disagreements, but in general, they were pursuing the similar interests in regards to stabilization of Assad's regime. And it was a rather successful case for foreign politics, showing that Russia can stabilize regimes. And Russian penetration into Africa, and after Syria, the fortified relations with Burma and Thailand, where either it is driven by direct military junta or some governments that understand that Russia is eager to intervene and help them keep the balance of power and use military tools to stabilize their regimes. And some regimes actually came in and asked for aid. That actually includes some of the African countries. Now that is being interrupted, because if Assad's regime is falling, then the question to Russia would be, how well can you stabilize that? Are you actually strong enough? Second is the question of bases, military bases and logistics bases to regularly supply your forces in Africa. And okay, aviation might still get there, but Tartu as the naval base is already blocked. It's difficult. It becomes more problematic. So the question of regional influence also is now facing a big question mark. And the main violin in this orchestra is Turkey. Turkey that kicked Russian butt in Syria, and Turkey that helped to kick Russian butt with Azerbaijan against Armenia. And also even producing some influence into Armenia. Turkey that is playing a very complex game against Israel, against the United States, against Kurds, against the regime of Assad, and they're playing it rather successfully. Therefore, Turkey is supportive of their regional strong player status. They're doing a lot of right actions. Russia, unfortunately for them, is now losing it. And can it be a permanent loss? No, nothing really is permanent in the world. And that goes back to the old Byzantine rule that you don't destroy your enemy completely, because today's enemy may become tomorrow's ally. But Russian position indeed is toppled, and we need to continue watching, observing that situation where everything will evolve. The thing is that post-Soviet countries, in accordance with communist propaganda, and it not only touches Russia, it touches Ukraine and all the ex-USSR countries. They very often are prone to present temporary results as big permanent results. Putin already announced 3 times that they have won in Syria. Now they'll have to announce it 4th time. They've out of resources right now. They cannot throw any infantry there. They sent several planes, several jets there, but that's about it. Naval support is also limited. They're blocked by Ukrainian forces at sea, so they cannot freely go and support Assad. The other problem is that on the backdrop of this resurgence, a lot of other forces woke up. Even ISIS somewhere in the desert started to do things. It's understandable that the first push came to an end, and now the forces of opposition in Syria are regrouping to continue, because there are different groups interested in their positions of power, like they got to Homs and some other towns where it's local militia that is pushing back on the rebels, because people locally are enjoying the benefits coming from natural resources, and they don't want to change that. So it's a very interesting dynamic there. For now, this is a tactical pause connected with the exhaustion after the first couple of days of attack, and now it's slowed down a bit, but we'll see how it goes. Assad's regime is already wavering. Situation is basically back to 2016, before Wagner and the rest were supposedly helping Assad's regime to take back Syrian territory. And again, there are conversations about coalition government and splitting Syria. Is it a direct damage that can play out for Russia, that can result in something for Ukrainian war? No. Is it a damage for Russian position on the Middle East? Yes, absolutely. Is it a damage for Russia in the big trade about the rules of the game and the powers in the world? Yes, as well, because if Russia will be pushed out of Syria as the weaker player, the stock of Russia will devaluate quite a bit. But Russian influence in the Middle East is so systemic and notable there that they will not completely lose their position, but they probably will rearrange something and reflect something on the ground. So they'll be trading regional rules, they'll be rearranging the global rules as well, and Russian position will depend upon their success. And it's interesting to address that, to see what will they come to agree about at the end. It's a good lesson in Eastern Byzantine politics. It reminds me back when I was talking to Azerbaijan in 2020, when they failed to take Karabakh back completely. There were a lot of people on the Azerbaijan side who were elated by their successes, and on the front they were very upset that the agreement is so lackluster. I was telling them, just take some time. Azerbaijan and Turkey will prevail over Russia eventually, just give it a few years. And today Karabakh completely is controlled by Azerbaijan. It took them about 5 years to change the situation in their favor completely. Syria is bigger, but there have been different stages there already where Russia and other countries were fighting directly against each other. And of course we can say that there was some local militia that was fighting with Russians back in the day there. And we all understand that there are a lot of actual Turkish military who are supposedly there on vacation, on personal leave. And Turkey was going through the stage of enjoying love, international love, because when everybody refused from supporting and trading with Russia directly, Turkey became the gray zone, a favorite gray zone. And nobody is concerned with this, because international politics is like that. It's changing and murky. Now imagine Ukraine on the place of Turkey. Can you conduct a questionnaire with Ukrainian citizens about how adult our politics are? There were tight time periods where we had very tight economic relations, where we had hostile relations. Now we're at hot war with Russia. Can we allow our thought to have such a quality of game where we can be trading, can be commercial friends, allies, and then we can be also opponents and can be actually fighting? Is our politics capable of that change? I don't think so. Turkey started back in the 90s on a much lower position than Ukraine did. And unfortunately, because of our infantile political trends in Ukraine, we are lagging behind what Turkey has achieved so far. And Today, by the way, we saw the statements by our president during the visit of Scholz to Ukraine that he was making statements about things that he was oppressing people. Remember, a year ago, you and I, we had a stream about possible Korean division of Ukraine, how huge the scandal was. Today, they are talking about that Korean split, or Korea-like. And Zelensky, instead, as a concession for splitting the country, is demanding, okay, take us into NATO. And then he's going back to, okay, take us to NATO without Article 5, perhaps. But meantime, you and I are still enemies for the society because we brought up this topic a bit too early. Now, Nikolai, do you think we can expect any strategic moves with this society when they fall to their own propaganda? Especially given that hooray patriotic propaganda that actually devours your ability to be more flexible. Because look at Turkey, they are in the Caucasus, in Black Sea, in the Middle East, and in Balkans. They're all that kind of state. And they need to serve all different kind of vectors. They're also Osman and Turk people's country. So they have to conduct complex politics. Complex politics ignites complex politicians who are capable to make complex decisions and be successful doing that. Ukraine, ideally, should be demanding for this kind of politicians to grow as well, because we are also on the crack of tectonic plates. But we, unfortunately, cannot do that now. And instead, we're criticizing Kuchma and his multi-vectoral approach and saying you cannot be on two chairs, and we are criticizing all that. So a question to our Ukrainians, how Turkey succeeds in representing their own interests so differently with different players, given that they are threatening the United States to push out American bases with nuclear arms from the territory of Turkey. Remember the story when Turkey was fighting with Wagner in Libya. They actually were elements, there was episodes there when Turkish troops were attacking Italian navy. Italians were trying to stop some developments there, and Turks attacked them, not hitting the vessels directly, but shooting right in front of, across the bow. There were a couple of jets, and I think it was not only Italian, I think also French Navy got warned in that not so friendly fashion. And yet they succeed, even though they had and still have a lot of options to fall into different directions and go to a much more difficult internal conflict. Their history is deeper and more problematic, and they have different forces within it, but the class of their politics holds it together, and is rather successful achieving its goals. And that's the question I'm posing to Ukraine. Look at Turkey. They're in a more complex situation. The regional superpower that is producing a very high level of gameplay, which will be playing a very high level game in the 21st century. We unfortunately cannot. Why? I'm not even going to answer this question, just try to ask that of yourself and see if you can find an answer why some people can and others cannot. A great question, Alexey. One more thing I wanted to clarify before the beginning of Syrian operation. The head of Shabak, Israeli intel. Oh, Shabak is not an intel, Nikolai. It is security service. It's like Ukrainian security service. Yeah, Mossad and Damana, those are intelligences. Okay, so yes, I stand corrected. He visited Turkey to meet with the head of the regional intel organization, Ibrahim Kalim, and the fact of these two countries coordinating their positions, given what was happening in Palestine and statements by the presidents who take very diametrically opposing positions, what does it tell you about the class of the game? Oh yeah, right. Erdogan was actually directly threatening Israel, told they're scoundrels, etc. But when it came to negotiating real interests, people usually pick the real interests. The problem of Ukraine, here's my hint in regards to the previous question. We do not understand our real interests. We only understand symbolic interests, and we're very decoupled from real interests. An example would be the burial of victims of Volyn tragedy. Our relations with Poland are much more important than these symbolic motions. And yet we still have failed to done it. This week there was some news that we made a commission. Wait, for the last 30 years and the recent 3 years where we were completely dependent upon Poland, what were we doing? Why are we doing it just now at the end of the third year of the war? And we fail to recognize our own interests, therefore we fail to protect them. It all starts with understanding real interests, and that stems from understanding reality the way it is, and not symbolic reality as presented by propaganda. So we are tied in our own pajamas, the kiddie pajamas that we failed to remove, and they actually slow us down. And Israel and Erdogan were attacking each other for a long time, but when it came to real interests in Syria, where their interests do coincide, they actually found common language, and they are now negotiating and consulting with each other. And now imagine Ukraine and Belarus, for example. Let's not take Russia in this case. Let's take Belarus because we did not have active military actions, but the rhetoric was pretty hot. So if Belarus would be attacking very aggressively, talking about attacking us, but never really attacked, right? And suddenly our head of security forces is going to his counterpart in Belarus about joint behavior regarding the third country, and that becomes known. Do you imagine how patriotic spring would have sprung in the butts of all these propaganda-driven crowds in Ukraine? Unfortunately, it's a kindergarten here. However, we are on the same tectonic split as Israel and Turkey and Syria, and we unfortunately cannot tackle it in the same fashion that we should be doing it. So it is a psychological problem. It stems from the psychology of our nation. I want you to comment on how successful was the moment selected, because we did analyze Azerbaijan earlier. It seems like they picked a very great moment for their action, very opportune moment. So it seems like Erdogan here is also picking a moment when Russia is on a peak of its current activity, and they're also facing difficulties because they need mobilization, and they're not doing it because it's a difficult step that will cause a lot of tension in the country. But they're actually lacking enough military personnel on the outposts, like external conflicts, and in Syria they probably depleted their troops as well. So this is a very good moment that Turkey picked. Right, this moment was not only picked successfully, it was also constructed successfully. And it's not so much anti-Russian motive there, it is driven by more anti-Iranian Hezbollah moment, because Israel did destroy quite a bit of Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is also very needed of the corridor between Iran and Lebanon through Syria. That corridor goes through Syria. If Assad's regime falls, the destiny of Hezbollah and ability of Iran to affect Israel and circumstance there is being sunset. So since Hezbollah was protecting this land corridor in the north, and Russian troops were helping them to protect it. Now, for the most part, Russian troops are gone, Syrian troops are busy in the south, and now they have to drop some troops to the north to still protect that corridor, but it's not so easy. The leadership of Hezbollah is in disarray, so it is not a well-picked moment only, it's also a constructed moment. Not to just wait for the moment, which you also need a talent, but actually to actively create such a moment. It is also being said that Erdogan depleted all possible negotiation options, and Assad was not moving one way or the other. Right, so he got explained that the world is more complex than it seems to Assad. Only complete idiots grab the weapon immediately. Initially, everybody smart starts with negotiations, and Azerbaijan was suggesting Armenia, also interesting options about Karabakh, and Armenia refused, and that's what the madmen do. The world is about the art of trade, and You basically suggest, look, this would make your position stronger, this will be a benefit, and then if you refuse, then okay, then you take a big yatagan from a huge sword, essentially, from the national Turkish clothes, and then shove it up the opponent's butt till they start to understand your position. So until they're a bit more agreeable. So I think that's what we're observing now in Syria. And why do you think Russia is not making these moves, Alexei? Did they not offer Ukraine anything like that? Oh, they did. They actually did. It's a difficult moment, actually. And in 2019, at the meeting in Paris, it seemed to be very well agreed. Then something happened. Apparently, something broke in the negotiations and the agreements, and it's a page that needs more research later after this war. Well, that's very interesting. All right. You don't want to go deeper into this now? No, we can talk about it now. That's fine, Nikolai. So, what masks our hysterical appeal that this is an existential conflict? The eternal enemy, Russia, wants to destroy Ukraine, put its flag over Lviv. It masks one simple thing, that the war on the side of Russia is rationally constructed, and it remains to be a rational construct. Even though there are some sacred things on their banners there, but it's still a very rational construct. Then what prohibited us from making it a rational construct? And then the second question that is more dangerous, I think, for some politicians, why two rational constructs failed to negotiate? And then one can pose the question, who was less rational and who was acting from some other convictions? Russians, when the Paris Agreement fell through, they posted a document, it's available online, what they agreed about. So you can look it up. Andrei Bogdan, who was participating in that, was giving some hints. Reread his interview and you'll find a lot of interesting elements. For example, acting executors, acting active politicians are saying that Ukraine actually was agreeing to provide water to Crimea, and Russia is saying that Ukraine agreed to provide water supply to Crimea, but the water never got to Crimea, right? Why? And there was a demand to follow through with the previous Minsk agreements. Also didn't happen. There were a million opportunities to negotiate. There were different tracks and opportunities to negotiate. So real reasons for this war and real demands before this war is a question that will be studied by historians later. I want to say that the share of Ukrainian responsibility is colossal. Of course, there is Russian responsibility too. There is blame there. But our share of this responsibility is colossal because we took responsibilities upon ourselves, certain obligations according to agreements, and never fulfilled them. And you can talk about the quality, and you can say that Debaltseva was made under some pressure. But why did we put the last names of Zakharchenko and Plotnikov, of those supposedly militia people from Donbass? The document was being prepared with Russian names there, but then somebody, we're not saying who, but somebody handwritten the names of those fellows from Donetsk and Lugansk republics and signed an agreement with them. This is the most anti-government story that one can find. The people who were there, they're saying that Putin, when he left that meeting, he was holding his head saying, well, they're so idiots, God thank you. He wasn't even expecting to have an agreement signed with Ukraine and those two regions, and not Russia directly. Negotiations in France. There were a lot of obligations signed by Russia and Ukraine did not fulfill any of them. Let the seamen out, forgave the credit in 3 billion that Yanukovych gave, and said goodbye. And there are a lot of interesting other points. It's deserving more and more research, and I promise you that if I get, or when I get political power in Ukraine, the first thing I will do is probably 20 commissions in Congress and prosecutor's office, and jointly with other countries, to try to understand better the reasons of this war, our preparation for this war, the flow of this war, the ending of this war, because we're also facing the end of it, right? We need to figure out how to conclude on which terms. So we will be investigating these terms, and those responsible will bear the brunt of punishment, because unless we do that, there will be no future for Ukraine, unless we prosecute those who were key people in reasons leading to that war. All right. I suggest, Alexey, we go to the front, to the map now. I think what 3 or 4 streams we did not look much at the front, and there are a lot of things happening there. I would probably suggest here to start with Kurakhovo, perhaps, which, according to this map, it's almost completely lost, or near that. Well, Deep State is saying that high-rises are still being fought for, but the logic is the same. The same scheme is being used by Russian side. They essentially get to the township. Our position usually is to take the township and hold it, and then Russia sends 2 fortified groups on the flanks and make sure we'll leave that township eventually. If you look along the front everywhere, you see cauldrons. And you can see the Great Novoselka. That's another example. Russians are going north, and then see they're making a turn to the left, to Novi Kamar, instead of going straight. Why do you think they're doing it? Do you see the river joining there to the north of Novoselka? And if you break the bridges, which will absolutely be done, our troops on both sides, to the north of Novi Kamar and to the south, they encircle our troops on both places. So same thing, they're using the advantage that they create on the front and using the template actions by Ukrainian side that always keep falling for the same mistake, and using the geography. Russian command or somebody there figured out how to use the small and big pincers, just like they were taught in school. Our command still failing to learn how to resist it. They unfortunately do not want to learn how to be successful in defense. In parallel, the day before yesterday, there is another wave of attack in the Kramatorsk area, Donetsk, Chasiv Yar, and area between them. Mariana Bezuglaya managed to note an interesting thing, that on one of the key directions, 93rd Brigade, commander, a day before that offensive, which Ukrainian side knew about, left for Kiev to take a new position in the office of the president. And Lugansk, where Drapati was responsible, also leaves a day before to another position in Kiev that has nothing to do with organizing the fight on the front. So 2 successful commanders who are effective on the front were removed from the main attack directions. They are supposedly moved to a higher position, but 1 day before Russian attack that was known about. So how the fuck do we understand that? That's the question posted by Mariana Bezuglaya, and we can only support that with a like and repost. The key brigade, a key commander on the key direction of this offensive that we are aware about, is being revoked, removed, flown out to Kiev on the eve of that aggression. And we'll leave that to commissions that will be investigating that after the war, and to our viewers to try to ponder. And their task is essentially to get to Konstantinovka, to create a platform to attack Drushkovka and Kramatorsk eventually. And they're trying to close the trap near Toretsk. Whether they will succeed, that's a good question. Maybe not. But another piece of news that was recently discussed in social media that Russian leadership is actively discussing, and according to some signs, is preparing mobilization for March of 2025. If the complex of these actions will be realized, we will really hurt on the front. If it will not be realized, then, knock on wood, it may give us some more freedom and probabilities to discuss things better. Now, let's look at the budgets. 34% of Russian budget are dedicated to military expenses one way or another. Does it mean that they will plan to fight throughout the whole 2025? No, not necessarily, but they understood that military power is still a force to be reckoned with in the modern world, and even after the ceasefire, they will still investing into their military-industrial complex. They made their conclusions, decisions, and they understand that they need to build more weapon systems. They need to keep their military machine well oiled. So it is not a sign that Russia is getting ready to fight throughout the whole next year, but that could mean that. So in any case, the threat of mobilization, even without it happening, is a very serious trump card for negotiations. It'll be very difficult for Ukraine to compensate for that new threat. Even if we drop the conscription age down to 18, will not compensate enough. We probably will be running behind the schedule on this, and again, we'll repeat the situation when Russians mobilized and we lagged for 6 or 7 months with that process. So there'll be another collapse on the front that we'll be facing. And as we see, even now, without mobilization, with the resources they have left, they're exerting pressure in Kharkov district near Borovaya, and to the south of that, they forced the river in 2 places. They crossed it, which is already a sign of complete or almost complete loss of control in that direction, yes, in that area. Because when, 2 dinghies are crossing the river with 8 idiots in front of your company position, and you let them do it, let them cross it and kill some of your soldiers and take more prisoners, that means that troops there are really not controlled or not managed well. One would think that after the first case, they should have drawn some conclusions. They're actually crossing Oskol in the second place and letting them do it. So this is a sign of loss of control and lack of understanding by leadership and lack of ability to organize any defense there. Then if you look at Kupiansk as well, you can see that there are other pincers showing up there, and there is new pressure on Kramatorsk direction, continued motion near Pokrovsk, Kurakhovo and Zaporozhye, and over there. And more information indicating that they're creating another group in Zaporozhye. You can look at the squares indicating their detachments. You can see that they're multiplying. And in my last stream with Golovanov, I did say that there was nothing to be afraid of near Oskol, but right after the stream, additional information surfaced up that it was supported by certain Telegram channels, and Mariana also mentioned that they are preparing a possible descent across Dnieper near Kherson. So that brings back the question of them trying to return Kherson region, Kherson district, that they added to their constitution. And note, that's what they can do at the leftovers of strategic reserves that they have. Why is that happening? Because we are crumbling. If we were in good condition, none of these plans would be successful. They would be only pressing somewhere in one part of the front, concentrating their resources there. Now imagine they're doing mobilization. First of all of these 5 directions, 5 sections will get additional resources with which they will exert additional pressure on us, and there is a good probability that will crumble, and they may add a couple more interesting directions. So Russians, even with the resources they have, they manage them more reasonably and more effectively than we do. And if we will continue to compensate, to try to compensate their mobilization, we'll probably be doing that with a lag of 2 to 3 months in a not enough too late fashion. And all that will be put on the negotiations table that are actively being discussed now already with Kellogg's plans, etc. So if they conduct their mobilization, we are fucked. If they just use it for negotiations, this is a very strong trump card that they can use, which we cannot really address with anything else on our side except for more whining that we're not helped enough. And that's the strategic layout. That cycle is being repeated once again in this war. If you're attentive, you've seen that happening before, and that tells me that the interests of those who are making decisions in Ukraine, their strategic interests, are outside the borders of the country. Because if they were worrying about these things as their own interests, they would probably be taking measures. But they're apparently thinking about something else and not about defense of the country. They're thinking about real defense of the country probably as the secondary or tertiary goal. The first goal is different. And I think it's probably maintaining the status quo and enriching the class during this war. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for answering that. I would have asked that question. I appreciate you elaborating. Now, about Russian mobilization, there was information going that there are some forced mobilization, etc. No, 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 that's fake. They don't. There is no reason for them to do forced mobilization. Plus, they have enough material stimulus. So whenever they declare mobilization, people will come to the mobilization outposts. They have enough. So right now they continually draft the contract-based troops, right? Yes, that's what they're doing now. But if they indeed succeed in mobilizing more, we will definitely suffer. So their plan is to do it in March, right? If Trump doesn't pacify us both. I think for now they probably will be using it as the card in the negotiations, because if we mobilize, then you'll all feel it. All right, that is a good segue to Kellogg's plan, because it was published right before we started the stream in details. And remember when initially the information about Kellogg's plan appeared, I did make a conclusion for myself that this person is for dual ultimatum. There is nothing but that approach here. If Ukraine agrees to participate in negotiations, then it gets enough military support. If Russia refuses to participate, then Ukraine gets a lot more military aid. So, from what is published, from the new things that are published, do you think the data supports my conclusion? Nikolai, remember when we started talking about dual ultimatum? I would not pick the real date, Alexey. It's been a while. Right, about 6 months already. And what we were told on both sides by very smart, supposedly, citizens of Russia and very smart citizens of Ukraine. Apparently, the resources that I quoted, they do know something in advance of events, probably at least half a year. So nothing changed. What we talked about half a year ago, dual ultimatum. The problem is that this dual ultimatum is not comfortable for neither Russia nor Ukraine. For Russia, it seems that Ukraine is crumbling, so they have better chances by fighting for another 6 months or a year. They have good chances, they think, to take all 4 districts, as they included them in the constitution. And they would basically fulfill the political goals of this war and say adios. We have very ghostly chances of stopping them, because the effectivity of our leadership, military leadership, is not only improving, it's actually weakening. However many resources we're given, all that will be spent, because political corruption is disintegrating the government apparatus. It's not effective. And it will not be effective in the current regime. So, and by the way, Russian military leadership is growing. We can observe that through aggregation of experience and through repressions. I think they have 60 commanding officers of armies and detachments. They're under investigation, so they're very selectively plucking out the commanders, the corrupt commanders, from those who actually can do things, which we are not doing in Ukraine, for example, if you just look at the army. And if you look at the crazy corruption at the defense contracts, inability to build strategic fortifications, change the strategy on the front, you can draw a lot of conclusions there. Our only hope is that the West will give us a lot more. The West must bear responsibility, must come to help us in this war or support us somehow to a larger degree. This is our politics, and the West doesn't want to do it. But in Russia, they have issues with the economy now. As reasonable people, somewhat reasonable, they are thinking that for this year, maybe next year, it'll be relatively okay. After that, it'll start getting bad. And reasonable people, they would prefer to stop not when it gets real bad. So you don't leave the casino in underwear or without it, at least come out in your jeans, right? So mobilization is a very costly story that withdraws too much people from the economy and creates unnecessary social pressure in society and actually costing money. And to go for that, that's a big problem. Also, India today refused Volodin, the Speaker of their Congress, a visa to visit without explaining the reasons. I think this is the motion by India that is aimed to show that Arestovych and ICBM story is absolutely inappropriate. You remember how Indian ambassador in Russia said that this is unacceptable for us, the use of any nukes, and being diplomatic, he said that if any country is using nukes, they will strike themselves out of the list of civilized countries, which is, on diplomatic terms, implies something like using a raw fish to slap somebody in the face. So India is a very important ally for Russia, or partner in the south, and such a statement, such an action, is a serious blow for Russian diplomacy. Plus, they have complications in Syria. They have other things to deal with. That's why I think they will scare us they'll threaten us with the mobilization, but in reality, they might not actually do it. On the other hand, it's very tempting to switch to military economy, to finish Ukraine. It's very tempting for certain circles, and there are some groups in Putin's vicinity who are trying to influence him in this way. What can we contradict to this, counterpose to this? We can play more cards of hysteria towards the West and to scream at them to participate in this war and provide us more arms and more ammo. Hysteria story is good at the beginning, but when it becomes a strategic gameplay, this is a weak strategy. And now we already are facing a situation where they are successfully advancing in 5 districts. They've taken 9 townships in the last week. That indicates that we are failing to hold them. And we don't have any good hope to change that because we are at the limit of our competence. With all the changes in the army, with all my sympathy to Drapatov, this is all like rearranging the beds in a whorehouse, because that doesn't really solve your problem. And even if you put Drapatov as the commander-in-chief of the military, he can perhaps make some particular things better, but it's difficult for him to change the system. Other people, other functions in the Ukrainian government are responsible for the system. That's why I do not see perspectives, good perspectives for Ukraine. Russia has some, we don't. This is how we come to negotiations. Russia is in a stronger position, we are in a weaker position. That's why all the concessions that will be made at the expense of Ukraine. Even if we will be pacified, the war will stop, it will be done at the expense of Ukraine. That's what Kuleba mentioned recently, ex-minister of Foreign Affairs. Head of NATO Stoltenberg made a similar, ex-head of NATO Stoltenberg made a statement. As always, all the key statements are coming through the X's, right? Ex-leaders, before the officials actually chime in. So both of them are saying that territorial losses are inevitable. I also would add here that the dream about NATO we can forgo. However much Zelensky offered 3 variants in the last 3 days, as one of my friends said, we'll soon need a special expert to determine which of the demands from NATO in Ukraine are actual, because there were like 5 different strategies offered in the last 3 days. And that's what I'm saying. We will not be joining NATO, and we will probably lose some territory. What else? Big question. We might also lose the energy systems if we will be protracting that, because Russia will likely destroy a lot more of it. In the meantime, there will not be a complete blackout, but we'll be sitting for 16 hours without electricity. Everything is hanging by a thread there right now, and they know it. So we are very vulnerable from a bunch of key points, and they're trading from the position of force. That means that we will be ceding territories and resources. Understandably, though, that too big of a concessions are not in the interests of the United States. So Trump needs to solve an unsolvable task. He needs to make Russia agree, which are in peak of their shape or in good shape, even though they do have some economy and other arguments, but he still needs to make them agree to a ceasefire. And he then also has to face Ukrainian leadership, who might be stubborn and say, well, let's escalate it to a nuclear conflict, we will never surrender. And it's going to be difficult to talk down both of these stubborn parties. I'm a big skeptic now about Trump's capability to stop it effectively like this. On the other hand, he does have strong interests, and it's not about giving us tomahawks, but the strongest interest he can sell to Russia is a place in the future world order that is now being defined, because this war completely dismantled the previous one. And he can offer a more respectable place to Russia than they had before. So give them more opportunities. And for that, they create a system of pressure like Syria and some other nuance. India, I think it is not without the conversation with Americans that they made this They took this action against Volodin's visit, it seems to me. So there is a bunch of stools that one can kick from under Russia to make them think. And of course, 14 kilometers, Russian troops are away 14 kilometers from some mining areas near Pokrovsk, that if they capture it, it'll bring down 50% of our metallurgy, and that will affect our budget significantly. That's macro-strategic influence on Ukraine. And we will crumble. By the way, if you note on the map, there are no fortifications in the area. There are random sporadic ones, but there are no systemic defense areas, defense lines around it. So here's the question. What do Russians take what they go for? They want to take unique coal that they need for their metallurgy, or do they prefer a position in the next world order, a more respectable, more strong position there? And I am a strong proponent that they will go for the position in the world order. That's why Trump has a strong card to play with them, not in terms of dumping tomahawks on Moscow, as Ukraine was dreaming, but in actually offering Russia a stronger position at the table. So Russians will be making decisions around these factors. And what will we be choosing between? Between very bad and bad. And it's easy to make it very bad for us. So we don't have really good options at the moment. You just don't supply us enough arms, and then we're facing a serious risk of the whole front crumbling and collapsing. So no illusions here. All the concessions will be at the cost of Ukraine. Of course, nobody wants to give everything to Russia, but yeah, we'll be the donating party. And we've added another term to our propaganda, a capitulation. Today, President Zelensky used this term on the emotional hype mode. What is capitulation? Right? We looked up in the dictionary. This is when your armed forces are disarmed and disbanded. This is not a scenario in any way. So why do you inject this term? And Zelensky is coming out saying, we cannot liberate the territories, we don't have enough, and we will follow through the diplomatic route, but we will never capitulate. And now, whoever posted a question of capitulation? Russians never did. They posted a question of denazification and demilitarization, but not capitulation. Why are we posting that term when nobody else does? Our opponents don't, we do. Yeah. Could you please elaborate more, Alexey? Maybe you know how it is constructed when President Zelensky on one hand is saying about diplomatic solution and offers different options, and that they will go diplomatic route and will achieve something. And then Andrei Yermak, the head of the office of the president, comes out and says that negotiations are only possible when the situation gets back to the state of February of 22. How do we understand that contradictory statement? Well, it would be good if it returned to the state of February, but, you know, there are three kinds of government actors. The first one are historic actors. They care about the country in a historic perspective. The second are government officials who take care about their people and government on the current historical stage. And then there are actors who only care about their status quo. And all the rest, interests of people, interests of the country, interests of the history, they are secondary to the status quo. And I suggest our listeners to place our current Ukrainian leadership to one of these three categories. So when somebody is saying that we need to return the situation to the borders of February 23 of 22, one can pose the question, what are you achieving with this? As actors, you'll have something to sell as history over Russia. You force them to roll back. But historically, this is an impossible term. Russia will not go for it. Why do you even suggest that as the possible position? Well, I ask you, Alexey. Right, I'm putting a historical question. Why are they suggesting it? That indicates, once again, that our minimal demands are in no way correlating with the interests of our opponents and are poorly understood by our allies as well, who also ask the same question. When you guys are making these demands, what do you mean? Why do you make unrealistic declarations or demands? This, I keep laughing that we don't have decision-making centers. We have non-decision-making centers. What would the real historical actors do? They would have published the data. They would have said, listen, this is the current situation. That's how many we have lost. That's how many we have left. This is how many we have wounded. This is our economy state. If we continue with this path, joining NATO and continuing the war, this is our possible outcome. Catastrophe on the front and disappearance of Ukrainian governance as a fact. In order for us to win anything, we need to do this, this, and this. If you disagree with this, well, here's what we can do. What would the second kind of leaders do? They would have said that, okay, we can do the referendum and we can give you the data and ask you as a population to figure out what do you want to sacrifice. So a referendum, people can say, are they ready to give the territory? Are they not ready? And then you can rely on the opinion of people, and that'll be your solution. And what do actors do? The third kind, they pump up propaganda and they make demands that are impossible to solve, and people continue to pay with the energy, with demographics, with money, with everything else. While this hustle is happening, there's a lot of hustle happening between the actors that enriches their pockets. And for example, sanctions that attacked a lot of businessmen that are currently losing their businesses to the political forces in power. Continuous violation of constitution in language, religious and cultural spheres, exploitation of the trauma of war, and the whole collection of crimes against your own people. I cannot qualify it in any other fashion. Historical crimes. Whether they will become criminal crimes, we'll see about that. Depends upon who will take the power next. If I happen to be there, I'll make sure that happens. So that's the choice. And the worst thing, I think, that can happen to the current actors is an audit, so that people would understand truthfully the situation, the number of wounded, the number of killed, the number of amputees. Just if you give the number of amputees, people will probably fret in horror, but they're not being told that. They're being told that we're preparing a counteroffensive. That's why part of people are still believing in some mythical victory in this war, or using military way to take stronger positions. One of the motives also driving them is to take some revenge on the West that promised aid but never fulfilled completely with that aid, that were stimulating to continue war but never gave real needed amount of help. And I think Ukrainian leadership is actually psychologically motivated to drag the Western countries into the war and force them to pay more in this war, probably even with lives, to take some revenge on the West not fulfilling their promises that they made before the war. And this is not even government politics, I think. This is really personal egos hurting and attempts to take revenge. And this all is happening with the tragedy of Ukraine on the backdrop. And people are taken hostages and very little they can do. They can get more somber and stop voting for these and stop supporting the voters of 91 in the polling. But people are prone to mass propaganda and they don't see politically alternative opinions, or they're very marginalized like mine. So it's difficult to expect awakening from people. That's why circumstances of extraordinary force will be talking. Reality will be talking instead of people. So if Russia continues to crumble our front, to destroy our energy systems, according to Gallup's polling recently, we have, 52% who want peace? Let's give it a couple more months and see how many more percent will want it. Now, imagine 75% do want peace at any cost. Situation got worse, the front is collapsing. One can pose the question, does Russia need peace at any cost when everything is crumbling? They can just take it by force now, right? And second, will our political actors go and fulfill the will of the people, which they were not fulfilling previously? We are a democracy, right? They should be fulfilling the aspirations of people, which they are not currently. So these two questions are seeming to be more and more rhetoric. Well, Alexey, Gallup's polls are about the only polls that we saw that showed this trend, that half of Ukrainians, or more than half, are already against the war. While other pollings produced in Ukraine, or maybe fabricated in Ukraine, perhaps with influence of leadership, they're not showing that picture. They're showing a different picture. So, who knows? If on one hand you're saying that people are prone to propaganda, representative democracy in Ukraine poses a lot of questions to an inquisitive eye. I had a stream last week. There were some actions against the attorneys that are being prosecuted now for illegal advice for their clientele who are being drafted. And the attorney actually was in the army for a year and a half. He was demobilized after the wounding, and he's now back to his practice, but now he is being arrested. His property is being taken away. Right, because people are getting abused by the drafting commission, and when they involve attorneys get all that criminal pressure on them. So our people are rightless. We usually don't talk much about our businesses, but I wanted to say a few words about our businesses in the country, which are being taken away, being pressured to leave their business to authorities in power. So with these politics in the country, who do you want to win over? Because all these actions, they're massive demotivators for your people to fight for anything. At the same time, they're posting the goals of universal scale. Nuclear conflict, attacks on Moscow. You know, there are supposedly some reasonable people in Israel, in Ankara, in Turkey, and there are unreasonable people here in Kiev, our leadership. And since our leadership is not wanting to face reality, then reality will force our people to face itself. So everything that Ukrainian powers are doing now, they're de facto helping Russia to win this war over Ukrainian people. Their actions are helping Putin's Russia to win this conflict over Ukrainian people. And we're going back to the matters we discussed in People's Reservist documentary that we talked about, 10 years ago, that Ukrainian people are fighting not only with the external enemy, but also with the internal enemy, with their own bureaucracy. Nothing changed, right? They're fighting against two governments, Russian government and Ukrainian government. Right, they're not openly fighting against Ukrainian, but they have to somehow tolerate and live under that rule. Look, and you're not the only one who is saying that. General Major Dmitry Marchenko, who is also undoubtedly a Ukrainian patriot, who gave an interview this week, who said that I think most of Ukrainian population understands that even if tomorrow will be some negotiations starting, the war will not stop. So we're just postponing it. And for today, we need to understand that we need to make sure we have leadership who will prepare us for the worst and who won't be telling us fairy tales that tomorrow will be fantastic and we'll go to a barbecue. And I think global corruption is to blame. What is happening wherever you spit, at the court, at the legal system, there is corruption everywhere. And as our political leaders are saying, it does not prevent this war from being won, but it does. It affects business, it affects people, and nobody is talking about it. But all the businessmen, even here in Nikolai, who were surviving, who are helping us to repair military equipment, who are aiding us all along, they're all being milked now by this corrupt government. And I don't know how we're holding. In Nikolaev, I'm calling a businessman who was always helping us and telling that we need some help in the brigade, and he is telling me, no, he can't. He's being milked by the government. He's already in the risk position. And he has only one wish left: to sell everything and close it here and move abroad and work there. So, look, Nikolai, what is a post-Soviet idea? Republican nomenclature in the United States went against the Soviet nomenclature. And they basically offered to replace the power with property. The mechanism to create the profit is simple. You basically make the regime a vampire of the local assets. Before the war, all these corruptioners from bureaucracy, they were happening two processes in parallel. They were doing business, which was mostly based on sucking resources from different local budgets and businesses. And the real business had to become oligarchs, because without their own media, without their own power figures in parliament and everywhere, you could not be doing your business. You had no defense. The bureaucracy would tear you apart. And that's what the political fighting in Ukraine came to. There was no real political fight. It was a fight between two groups. The group of financial industrialists needed to get certain political levers to fight with the bureaucracy and those corrupt figures. And the main difference between the first group and the other group was that the businesses actually were paying taxes to local budgets, and they were not interested in stealing everything from themselves, while all post-Soviet ideas were based on stealing from the budgets and the country. And now, during the war, bureaucracy and the power agencies get super authority over businesses. And instead of supporting it, they start to rape and pillage businesses. They take away property. They steal a lot. They horribly steal from the budgets. Remember building a stadium 20 kilometers away from the front? Or money for the mortar rounds. So they're fighting essentially against their own people. Remember how many documentaries were about wasting money in the energy systems. And some people actually were removed at the end. But in parallel, they're also taking away businesses where they can. All the bureaucrats, they're essentially targeting businesses they like, and they're trying to expropriate them from the businessmen. Because that is also done under the guise of fighting the war, and we need more resources for the war. That's why the mono-majority that is ruling now has grown the post-Soviet idea to its culmination. And that's what we're seeing now. The future of Ukraine, new Ukraine, needs to stop this practice. That's what we should have learned on the practical experience, I guess. First is that the bureaucrat needs to be decoupled from economic influence into any economic processes or business actions, that he cannot benefit on private property. He also should be monitored to not be able to steal from local budgets, creating fake businesses and tender schemes, etc. And third, even during the military action, secrecy and patriotism should not be used to weaken the methods of control. The control should actually be exacerbated during these times. But look what happened. They launched the propaganda, and people voluntarily refused from cultural, language, religious, and business rights. Remember the old story? One of the smart writers during the times of Hitler. When they came after communists, I was quiet. When they came after the other party, I was quiet. When they came after me, there was nobody to speak for me. That's why I'm insisting that no rights should be revoked. Because if you are quiet about somebody else losing their rights, you will lose your rights eventually too. And I think some new Theodore Dreiser will write about that again. Because most businessmen in Ukraine, even having resources, they preferred to fall on their knees and to go along with the government. They were oppressed via the patriotism, via the propaganda, and everybody surrendered. I only know very few who are trying to resist it. But business could have united. That could have been a different picture. Could have fought individually, but they preferred not to. They preferred to be milked, and now they have two exits, either to leave or to support a different party, different force in the next elections who will be guaranteeing their freedoms and defense of those freedoms as the other freedoms of other groups in the society. End of first hour.